I think the moment that is going to stick out to most people in this masterclass is an extraordinary one, where you sit down and you read what you call the would-be victory speech.
My fellow Americans, today you sent a message to the whole world.
What compelled you to sit down and revisit that speech?
Well, I wanted to be as helpful as I could to the viewers and to the process of being in a master class. Well, I didn't, as you know, write a concession speech, because even though we had a lot of bumps those last 10 days, I still thought, we could pull it out. So I worked on a speech that really was about my journey and had a real emphasis on my mother's life and journey as a way of, making it clear that, yes, I would be the first woman president, but I like everybody, stood on the shoulders and lived the lives and the experiences of those who came before us. I dream of going up to her and sitting down next to her, taking her in my arms and saying, "Look at me, listen to me. You will survive. You will have a good family of your own and 3 children. And as hard as it might be to imagine, your daughter will grow up and become the President of the United States."
That's Hillary Clinton reading from the victory speech she fully expected to deliver on election night 2016, but of course never did. That speech is one of several our next guest writes about in the new book, Undelivered, the never heard speeches that would have rewritten history. The book's author, Jeff Nussbaum, joins us now. He's a former senior speechwriter to President Biden. Jeff, thanks so much for being with us this morning. It's such an interesting idea for a book, and just going through the list you put together of speeches, it really spans American and world history. So how did you find and curate this list of speeches?
Yeah, well, it started election night 2000 when I was a kid speechwriter for Al Gore, and at one moment I was holding 3 speeches that he had, a victory, a concession, and then strangely enough, we thought he would win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote, and I lost them. I don't have them. They're not in the book. But it sent me on this 20-year journey to find places, not just in political history, but as you mentioned, in national history, military history, world history, where the outcome was so in doubt that there was an alternate draft prepared, and that alternate draft gives us a brief look down a path that we didn't take.
And it just shows how close run so many events in history were that these people thought they may actually have to deliver this alternative speech. One that stood out to me was Dwight Eisenhower's scripted apology. If D-Day had been a failure back on June 6 of 1944, then General Eisenhower wrote this, quote, "I just said the landing had been a failure, and it's no one's fault but mine. I was the one who picked out. I knew I couldn't fail except on weather. I was the one that was responsible for the decision to go, and all the fault belongs to me, and that's that. If it did fail, you know this, I was going into oblivion anyway, so I might as well take full responsibility." That's top of mind for me. I was with my kids at the beaches of Normandy just last week, and standing there, it seemed impossible that that would succeed, but they did pull it off. Tell us more about that speech that was never delivered by General Eisenhower.
Yeah, so he had a habit of, before ordering an engagement into battle, he would write an apology for its failure. He would imagine its failure and write an apology. And in that draft, which is very short, he wrote it in haste. He actually misdated it. One of the fun things to see is he edits a line. He basically has a line where he's written, "The troops have been withdrawn," and he crosses it out and changes it to, "I have withdrawn the troops." And for those of us who remember our grammar, he's taken out the passive voice and put it in active voice. And to emphasize it, at the end, he writes, "The decision was mine alone," and underlines "mine alone." And so it's just a wonderful example of the language of leaders, of the fact that leaders take responsibility, right? Leaders don't say something happened. They say, I made this happen, or I didn't make this happen. And so even in this momentous military event, he takes the time to imagine failure and take responsibility for it. And by the way, he after the D-Day was a success, he folded it up, put it in his wallet, forgot about it, found it weeks later, tossed it in the trash, and his aide basically said, "This one's a keeper."
Wow, what a great story from history. And Mike Barnicle, we've been talking so much about what former President Trump did and didn't say around January 6th. And Jeff has in his book a version of Richard Nixon's resignation speech following the Watergate scandal, writing this: "There is a time to fight and a time to leave. At each step of the way, I've tried to serve what I believe to be the best interests of the country. When I believed that those interests would best be served by fighting to retain office, I fought to retain it. Now I believe they would best be served by my leaving office, and so I shall leave." From Richard Nixon. That's a draft of the speech.
Yeah, there's some amazing portraits of history that never happened in this book. And Jeff, I'm curious as to how you managed to select what you selected, what else you left on the table, what else is out there, and specifically, did you ever run across anything in Lyndon Johnson's tenure from the Gulf of Tonkin on that if he had given a speech about Vietnam, that could have really changed history?
So I get this question a lot, and in truth, there were a lot of cases where I just looked for breadcrumbs wherever I could find them, and sometimes those breadcrumbs led to a brick wall. So, I know there was a speech prepared for the failure of the Camp David Accords, where President Carter was going to put the blame at the feet of the Israelis. I know where the draft was. I talked to the person who wrote it, and it's just disappeared. And so, not to sound too Donald Rumsfeldian, but there are some unknown unknowns in this book. There's some speeches that I don't know, and I had hoped that the publication of it would bring some of them out of the woodwork. And so that's already happened. In fact, some folks have reached out to me with speeches. So I did not come across any Lyndon Johnson, but that's probably only for lack of me finding the thread to begin pulling.
Jeff, you've also gone around the world and you have the speech from Emperor Hirohito after the end of the Second World War. And he wanted to deliver some kind of apology for the war, but he wasn't allowed to by General MacArthur. Why not?
Yeah, so this is a fascinating episode. He was really heartsick when he began to see what had happened to his country, what he had led his country into. And so he wanted to apologize. And we, MacArthur, as you say, didn't want to let him do it. We wanted the emperor's seal of approval on our occupation. And there was some concern in some quarters in America that if the emperor resigned or admitted that he was fallible, apologized, because he was supposed to be a deity, that would require that he resign. And if he resigned, the fear was that the Japanese would rise up and fight again. So MacArthur felt it was very convenient to have the emperor in power and kept him there. And in the draft of the emperor's speech, which appears in this book for the first time, translated into English, we see the emperor, use a word that Japan has never used before or since to describe their role in World War II that approximates like deep, humiliating shame. And that's a word that Japan has never used.